In the spring of 1976, outside the Mid-South Coliseum in Memphis, the rain never stopped. For 3 days, a young woman held her place in lane, soaked, clutching a cardboard sign, "Elvis, you saved my life." What happened when the doors opened would become a story told for decades. Before we dive in, if you believe kindness has the power to change a life, stick with us to the end. This story shows why Elvis's compassion still moves millions. Don't miss the twist. The rain came down hard that week in Memphis. Not a soft drizzle, but the kind of steady storm that soaks you to the bone within minutes. According to witnesses, the sidewalks outside the Mid-South Coliseum looked more like rivers, with water rushing toward the gutters, splashing over shoes and ankles. Still, the line of fans stretched for blocks, umbrellas sagging, ponchos clinging to shoulders, cardboard signs bleeding ink. In the middle of that line stood a young woman. Her hair was plastered flat against her cheeks. The denim jacket she wore had turned to shades darker, heavy with water. In her hands, she clutched a piece of cardboard that had curled from the damp. Across it, in thick marker, were 5 words, "Elvis, you saved my life." People around her tried to convince her to step under awnings or leave for the night. One man offered her a spot beneath his umbrella. She shook her head. "If I leave, I lose my chance," she whispered. She had waited too long for this. For 3 straight days, she barely moved from that line. Reports say she ate little more than a few granola bars, sipped from a thermos her mother dropped off, and slept curled against the concrete. Jacket wrapped tight, cardboard sign pressed against her chest. Fans passing by would recognize her after a while. "That's the girl who's been here since Monday," someone murmured at night. The neon glow of nearby diners flickered against the wet pavement, casting red and gold reflections across puddles. The air smelled of fried food drifting from the corner cafe, mixed with a metallic bite of rain-soaked concrete. Bus engines hissed as they passed, and still she stayed. Why? Some who stood near her remember her telling small pieces of her story. Her father had died just months before. The silence in the house had been unbearable, but it was Elvis's voice spinning on the old record player that carried her through. She told one woman, almost apologetically, "He's the reason I'm still here. If I can just let him know, maybe that will be enough." The line itself became a kind of community. Strangers huddled together, shared ponchos, passed sandwiches. Yet, even among the crowd, her determination stood out. Not once did she leave her place. People whispered about her resolve, shaking their heads at the sight of her soaked jacket. Her pale lips pressed tight in focus. As the 3rd day wore on, the storm finally eased into a grey drizzle. The arena loomed ahead, its concrete walls streaked dark from days of water. Security began stringing ropes to control the swelling line. The murmur of anticipation replaced the constant patter of rain. Somewhere inside, the sound crew tested equipment, deep bass notes thudding through the walls, lights flickering as technicians adjusted spotlights. At last, as evening fell, ushers appeared at the glass doors. Keys jangled. The metallic click echoed louder than the chatter of the crowd. People leaned forward, breath caught, as the locks slid open, for the young woman whose clothes were still damp, whose cardboard sign had begun to tear at the edges. This was the moment she had been holding on for. Every hour in the rain, every shiver in the night, had been for what was about to happen inside. And as the ushers pushed open the heavy doors, the line surged forward, voices rising, hearts pounding. What she couldn't have known, what none of them could, was that her 3 days in the rain were only the beginning of a story that would leave even Elvis himself pausing. Mid-song, the doors swing wide, and the crowd rushes inside. The lights dimmed, and the roar of the crowd became a tidal wave. Inside the Mid-South Coliseum that night in 1976, nearly 18,000 fans were on their feet. Programs rustled, camera flashes popped, and the faint hiss of the sound system filled the air before the first note struck. Then a spotlight cut through the haze. Elvis walked out. Witnesses recall the shimmer of his white jumpsuit catching the beams. Rhinestones sent sparks across the arena, reflecting off banners and sequins in the audience. The noise was deafening screams, applause, the pounding of feet against the floor. Yet, even with thousands reaching for him, Elvis's eyes didn't wander aimlessly. Those who stood close to the stage say he scanned the rows with purpose, pausing longer than usual near the front. And there she was. The young woman, hair still damp from the rain, sat gripping her cardboard sign. The ink had run, but the words were still visible. Elvis, you saved my life. She was shaking, not from the storm now, but from the disbelief of seeing him just a few feet away. The band struck their first notes. Brass and guitars pushing through the air. The crowd's energy rose higher, a living wave crashing against the stage. Security braced as people leaned forward, surging, desperate to get closer. And yet, several witnesses recall that Elvis seemed distracted. He sang his opening lines, voice steady and strong, but his gaze returned again and again to that one spot in the audience. His expression softened. Some swear his smile faded for a moment, replaced with a look of concern. The woman, overwhelmed, lowered her sign to her lap. Her lips moved, whispering along with the lyrics she had memorized through years of spinning records in her bedroom. But her shoulders trembled, and even from the stage, Elvis seemed to notice. For most fans, this was a concert like no other, eruption of music, a night they'd remember forever. But for Elvis, something had shifted. The noise of thousands clapping in rhythm couldn't pull his eyes away from that cardboard sign, damp and fragile in her hands. Halfway through the song, something happened that few in the arena expected. Elvis raised his hand. A single, slow gesture. The band faltered, horns falling silent. The lead guitar dropped out, mid-riff. Drums faded to a hush. Suddenly, the arena's roar turned into a vacuum of silence. 18,000 voices froze, caught between excitement and confusion. He never did that, one fan later recalled. He never stopped like that. Not once. The only sounds left were the faint buzz of amplifiers and the restless shuffle of the crowd. Somewhere in the back, a child's voice called out, then silence again. Elvis stepped closer to the edge of the stage, gripping the microphone in one hand, eyes locked on the same spot in the front rows. Fans followed his line of sight, craning their necks, whispering, "Who is he looking at?" The young woman's hands tightened on her sign, her breath caught. She had wanted to tell him what his music meant to her. She never imagined he'd stop a show for her. Elvis lowered the microphone, leaned toward his band, and gave a small nod. The musicians exchanged puzzled looks, but stayed still, waiting. The audience buzzed with anticipation. Something was happening, something none of them had seen before. And then, with no warning, Elvis set the microphone aside, raised both hands, and began to step down from the stage. The king was walking into the crowd. Gasps rippled through the arena as Elvis descended from the stage. The steps creaked under his boots, and for a moment the spotlight followed, casting his shadow long against the floor. Thousands of eyes tracked him, but his gaze stayed locked on the young woman in the front row. Security hesitated. This wasn't part of the routine. They exchanged quick glances, unsure whether to block his path or clear it. Elvis gave a subtle wave with his hand, the kind that needed no words. The guards stepped aside. The crowd, sensing something extraordinary, fell into a hush. The air was so still you could hear the faint drip of rainwater leaking through ceiling pipes onto the concrete. Programs stopped rustling, conversations cut off mid-sentence. All that remained was the faint hum of amplifiers and the sound of Elvis's boots hitting the floor. Witnesses remember the young woman covering her mouth with one hand, cardboard sign pressed tight against her chest with the other. Her lips trembled. She wasn't screaming or reaching like the others. She sat frozen, as if afraid to break the moment. Elvis reached her row. Fans leaned back, partying just enough to give him space. He bent slightly, lowering himself to her level. His hair glistened under the light, a single bead of sweat rolling down his temple. "You waited for me?" he asked quietly, his voice low enough that only those closest could hear. She nodded, her eyes brimming with tears. Her voice barely escaped. 3 days, Elvis tilted his head, studying her face. A softness crossed his expression, unspoken recognition of what those words meant. Around them, people pressed closer, trying to catch every detail, every gesture in that silence. A camera flash went off, capturing the exact moment Elvis reached for her hand. His grip was gentle, yet firm, grounding her trembling fingers. For the young woman, who had stood in the storm for days, that single touch carried the weight of every sleepless night, every whispered prayer. "Come with me," Elvis said simply. Gasps rose again as he guided her out of her seat. The crowd parted reluctantly, people stumbling back to let them through. Security moved quickly now, forming a loose shield as Elvis led her toward the stage stairs. She glanced around in disbelief, her cardboard sign slipping from her grasp and landing in a puddle of spilled soda. No one picked it up. All eyes were on the girl walking beside Elvis Presley. They reached the steps. Elvis helped her up, one hand steadying her back. The spotlight swung wide, catching them both in its beam. The crowd erupted into cheers, then hushed again, unsure what they were witnessing. Witnesses later said the girl's knees buckled as she climbed, and Elvis tightened his grip to steady her. He leaned close, whispering something that was lost in the roar of the audience. She nodded, tears streaking her face. For a man known for his showmanship, this was different. There were no theatrics here, no rehearsed move, no scripted interaction, just a simple act of pulling one fan into his world, breaking every rule of the stage. As they reached the top, Elvis released her hand, only long enough to gesture toward the band. The musicians looked at each other, waiting for a cue, but none came. Instead, Elvis placed a hand gently on the young woman's shoulder, guiding her toward the center of the stage. The arena was silent. The kind of silence that comes only once in a lifetime, when thousands hold their breath at the same time. And then, with the girl standing under the blinding lights, Elvis turned back to his microphone. The king was about to make the entire arena witness something unforgettable. The stage lights were blinding. They poured down in a hot wash of white and gold, making the arena floor vanish in a haze. For the young woman, it was overwhelming one moment, shivering in the rain. The next standing beside Elvis Presley, the most famous performer in the world. The crowd thundered when they saw her. Some screamed, Some wept, and others simply stared, mouths open, unsure what they were witnessing. It wasn't unusual for Elvis to toss scarves or shake hands. But this bringing a fan on stage was something entirely different. Elvis lifted a hand, palm outward, and the cheers dimmed to a respectful hush. He turned to the young woman, shielding her slightly with his body from the blinding light. In that small gesture, he created a private space for her on a stage watched by thousands. He leaned close, his voice low, words lost to the audience. Witnesses say she nodded quickly, wiping at her cheeks. Her hands shook at her sides, and Elvis reached out, brushing the wet sleeve of her jacket with his fingers. The simple act drew another roar from the crowd because they could see his tenderness, his sincerity. Then, with one smooth motion, Elvis removed the silk scarf from his neck. It shimmered under the lights as he draped it carefully across her shoulders. The crowd erupted, cameras flashing in bursts of white. For her, it wasn't just a scarf, it was proof that her 3 days in the storm had been seen, honored, remembered. But Elvis wasn't finished. He stepped back toward the microphone, nodding at the band. The musicians exchanged a quick glance, unsure. Then Elvis lifted the mic and began to sing. The opening notes of Love Me, Tender floated into the arena, softer than the earlier thunderous numbers. His voice wrapped around the space, rich and steady, but this time it wasn't for the crowd. His gaze never left the young woman. Every word was directed to her. She covered her mouth, shoulders shaking, tears streaking down her cheeks. Fans in the front rows wept with her, clutching each other's arms as they realized what they were witnessing. Elvis Presley giving one song, one stanza, to a single fan who had waited in the rain. The arena had never been so quiet. Even the air seemed to pause, holding the moment. The hiss of the speakers, the faint crackle of the mic, the shuffle of feet, all of it vanished beneath his voice. When the final line fell away, Elvis didn't hold for applause. Instead, he lowered the microphone slowly, turned to the girl, and gave a small, private smile. He leaned close again, whispering something that no one else could hear. Witnesses say she nodded through her tears, gripping the scarf tighter around her shoulders. Then Elvis straightened, glancing back at his band. He murmured a few words to the band leader. Guitars hung silent, horns waiting for a cue that didn't come. The band leader frowned, uncertain, then gave a sharp nod to his players. The stage fell into complete stillness. The crowd leaned forward, restless, sensing that something else was about to happen. Cameras clicked. Fans chanted his name. Elvis placed one hand gently at the young woman's back and guided her a step closer to the edge of the stage. He motioned toward the audience, as though to say, "This moment is hers." The arena roared again, waves of sound crashing over them. But Elvis kept his focus steady. He held her arm just firmly enough to keep her grounded, and then, with no announcement, he tilted his head to the side and said just loud enough for the microphones to catch, "Let's make sure she never forgets this night." The crowd exploded in cheers, unsure what he meant, but sensing a promise. A decision was made on that stage one that would reach her doorstep days. Later, the concert ended in a blur of music and thunderous applause. Elvis closed with his usual set, but for many in that arena, the highlight had already passed. Whispers spread through the seats. Who was the girl? Why her? What had Elvis said? Cameras had caught glimpses, but no one knew the full story. For the young woman, the night was a dream she could hardly process. She walked out of the Mid-South Coliseum with Elvis's scarf still draped across her shoulders, damp with her tears. Strangers congratulated her, touched her arm, asked what he'd whispered. She only shook her head, overwhelmed, clutching the scarf tighter. Back home, her mother gasped when she saw it. The silk shimmered under the kitchen light, still carrying the faint scent of Elvis's cologne mixed with the heat of the stage. "He chose you," her mother whispered, eyes wet with pride and disbelief. But the story didn't end there. 3 days later, a package arrived at their doorstep. The cardboard box was stamped with a Memphis return address. No explanation, no fanfare, just a simple package delivered by hand. Inside, nestled in brown paper, was a guitar. Its body gleamed under the light, polished wood reflecting the room around it. Across the front, in bold blue ink, was Elvis Presley's signature, and tucked beneath the strings was a folded note. Her hands shook as she opened it. The handwriting was unmistakable, bold yet elegant. The message read, "You'll always have a seat in the front row." Elvis, the young woman, let out a sound somewhere between a sob and a laugh. Her mother, standing beside her, pressed a hand to her mouth. Witnesses later recalled that she dropped into a chair, the guitar clutched tight to her chest, as if afraid it might vanish if she let go. Neighbors came by that evening just to see it, to touch the strings, to read the note. Some doubted at first, seemed impossible that Elvis would send such a gift, but the signature was clear, the handwriting authentic. Word spread quickly through the neighborhood. Elvis hadn't just pulled a fan on stage. He had reached beyond the concert hall, into her home, into her life. Local papers would later pick up the story. Photographs show the young woman years later, still holding that guitar, the ink slightly faded, the scarf framed on her wall. "It wasn't just a gift," she told a reporter. "It was proof that he saw me, that my story mattered." For Elvis, it may have been a simple act of kindness. For her, it was life-changing. After losing her father, she had felt invisible, drifting. 3 days in the rain had been her desperate attempt to be heard, to let Elvis know what his music had meant. And in return, he gave her something tangible, something she could hold, touch, and keep for the rest of her life. The scarf, the song, the guitar, they became family treasures. Visitors who came into their home were shown the items with reverence, not as trophies, but as reminders of a moment when kindness crossed the barrier between idol and fan. Over time, the story became part of local legend. Neighbors retold it, papers reprinted it, and witnesses confirmed the details. Fans who had been in the arena nodded and said, "Yes, I remember." He stopped the show. He walked into the crowd. He sang just for her, even decades later. When the guitar's strings grew brittle and the scarf's colors faded, the story held its power. It wasn't about the objects themselves. It was about the recognition. The proof that even at the height of fame, Elvis still saw the people who believed in him. Some say Elvis never forgot that night either. According to crew members, he mentioned the girl backstage, quietly remarking, "That's what it's all about." He didn't elaborate, but the statement lingered for fans today. The moment stands as more than a story. It's a reminder of why Elvis remains beloved, not only for the music, not only for the showmanship, but for moments of humanity like this, when he chose to stop, listen, and give back. And so the legend of the girl who waited 3 days in the rain endures, passed down like a song, proof that kindness can echo louder than applause. Closing beat, her devotion gave Elvis a chance to show his heart, and his gift gave her a story that would outlive them both. If this story touched you, share it with someone who believes kindness can stop a room. And tell us in the comments, what's the moment you'll never forget from a music legend?